So for this first topic, we decided to categorize them. As you all know, we had 4 readings for this week's discussion post, so it was a bit hefty amount of information that we had to try and organize. So for the first topic, we did the structural racism and zoning, in which a lot of you guys had questions within the zoning laws and how the racial segregation kind of goes hand in hand in a way. So one of your questions was, how can architects and planners design urban interventions that actively confront and dismantle the legacy of inclusionary zoning and ordinance? And then the next one that kind of goes in more hand in hand with the topic is, to what extent can we call ourselves a democratic society when contemporary zoning laws, though not explicitly racial, continue to uphold racial and economic segregation?
You're gonna have to shorten that, man. Yeah, that's hard.
And we had more questions that followed through it, but I don't want to go through all the questions, but the ones that stood out to us the most was can design solve what policy created, and then you go down. We had a little section in there that's also talking about racial inequalities and where it is. Yeah, racial inequalities and government policies make segregation. There were some looking at them, there were some questions that were asked with the okay, so how have the federal, state, and local government policy of residential segregation made mandate towards the 20th century continue to shape current patterns of racial inequalities and wealth, education, health, and what specific forms are necessary today to reverse their constant impact? So questions like that were very sold out through it all, because it was I really liked this part of it. I did not read this article, so looking at the questions was very intriguing to me. So that's why this part stood out to me, and it goes hand in hand with the first part, because they're all talking about the zoning, the segregation that were happening through policies that were created, rules and regulations that were made that separated some parts of everything that was happening. And then we have aesthetic strategies and social displacement. Some of the questions were, how can designers balance the creation of diversity public spaces with the increased middle class desire for spatial and social isolation? And then the other questions that followed through with that same prompt, which was the I think part of it, how do people prevent private land consolidations? And my question, I read the Summers article. It made me ask, how to urban redevelopment and aesthetic strategies reshape the meaning of Black cultural spaces without necessarily removing of Black people as well. So reading that article made me more okay, what is there that we can do? What is an aesthetic thing that can incorporate everything and everyone? So yeah, and then Nasima also asked a question that. That was so I was yeah, that was how does using Black culture as an aesthetic and urban redevelopment hide and enable the displacement of Black communities? Then we have security and exclusion. Security and exclusion was more focused on how we can find those safe spaces through design, and as well as just being safe in your design, or be space in a space where it has a good design in the sense. So how can we find a balance between security, safety, and freedom in design? And then another question was, how can cities like Los Angeles design to keep certain people out, and what does that say about who feels welcome or safe in public spaces as well? So that was another question that stood out to me. And then we have community land trust and their effectiveness. One of the questions that was we all liked was this part. How do designers support the people searching for affordable housing that are either subsidized or by a CLT in order to create equality between individuals? So that was, I think, where a lot of things come from, because like we're talking about community trust on lands and their trust and their effect on this. I feel like that is a conversation where it's either owned lands are either owned by a private group or they're owned by the government. And then how can we like use that to create quality between, because I know like right now in this day and age we have like increase in land prices and housing prices. So like if it's owned by a private like company or family or the government, how does that, like, for me, how I looked at it was, how does that price stay like equal or even throughout every like area or place? I think that that's important, because at the end of the day, we are going to look for land, we're going to look for housing somewhere, somehow. And then if like you go one place, like, I mean, it's happening now, you tell like housing prices in Texas and housing prices here are totally different. So like how to keep like a balanced view. Yeah, this was what, another question that was like we liked as well was, how can community land trust advance justice along affordability, which I just talked about. So yeah. Also.
Yeah.
A lot of questions to keep in mind. As you can tell, Ethan is doing a great job writing down all of the questions so we can have them as we continue presenting, while Robert and Ignacio goes forward with their lecture.
It's just a lot. You guys are tough. We apologize in advance. We're not gonna do justice to this set of challenges.
Yeah,
But we'll try. Right?
yeah, so I just want to highlight that there are some of these questions that are repeated from last week, which is normal. Especially the ones, if I can summarize them, so the ones related to the privatization of the land is something that we discussed last week. And we discussed in the seminar, we'll continue discussing in the seminar. There are others more related to the role of CLT. I don't know if we'll have time to discuss CLT, the community land trust in detail. And so we will present CLT today, but I don't know if we'll address that in that level of details. And I think the ones that we will address the most are the ones related to inclusionary zoning and its relations with affordability and democracy and race. So we'll talk about that today. So we have to move forward. We have a lot of content today for Robert.
Yeah.
His lecture is, I was revisiting mine and I'm really happy with what we have today. I was reading yours on mine. So we have to move forward because there's a lot.
I'm nervous.
I'm a little nervous, yeah.
I looked at last year's lecture and I said, oh my God, this is not even close to good enough for
Yeah.
this group. I've got a lot of work to do. I had trouble sleeping. Are you okay?
I didn't sleep at all.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
hard time.
yeah. It's a difficult one.
And it's not easy for you, because one of the things we're gonna look at here, it's gonna get personal. We're going to take a peek at what it's gonna be like when you get to the point, you know how we're always looking forward to 2050? Well, let's look forward to when you're ready to buy a house. Who's gonna buy a house at some point? Okay, I'm really sorry. We're gonna take a peek at what that journey holds for you. Okay? Okay, so here's our itinerary for my part, 5 topics. And I'm gonna do this from now on. I'm gonna show us where we are. So you see the first one is bolded. And these 4 are not bolded. It's a little subtle, a little too subtle, right?
Too subtle.
Okay. I'll work on, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'll.
Bigger font size, a little slightly bigger.
You guys, everyone's good.
Well, you can see black and white.
I know.
That was first thing.
Actually, I appreciate it. I need it. I need help. Thank you for your support. Okay. So is it structure or is it agency? What's your favorite action movie? Spider-Man. Is it structure or is it
Agency?
agency? Right? Because he's like, I'm just a high school kid, but man, I'm gonna defy the odds with my superpowers. Right? What's your favorite action movie? What's another one? You know, Charlie's Angels. Is it structure or is it agency?
What about the boys?
The Voice. The Voice. Is it structure or is it agency?
What is that?
Voice like.
That's something. Singing.
That's not action.
Well, it's hard. You know, the kid who doesn't give in to fear and defies the odds, that's the hero of The Voice. It's their agency that has them triumph over all odds. Here's one. I don't even, you guys even know about this stuff?
No, of course, Andor. Andor is a friend now.
Andor?
Andor, yeah.
You know about Andor?
No.
What?
Do you know about Luke Skywalker? Does the word Luke Skywalker?
Yes.
Okay, do you remember this moment? Oh, it's so hard to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's saying he's about to use his computer to help him drop bomb into the air duct into the Death Star. It's a 1 in a million shot, but it's computer assisted, and then the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi comes over to his to trust in the Force, and he turns off the computer assist, and everybody panics. Luke, your computer assist is off. He trusts in the Force, and he trusts. Of course, agency. It's agency overcoming the crazy odds of structure. This is exactly what we're talking about. If you take this class, and I hope you do, if you remember the theories, the storyline of previous lectures, when does a project have the capacity to alter the operating systems? When it produces unlikely outcomes that are unpredicted by previous operating system performance. So structure and agency is what it's all about. How many of you are going to earn more money than your parents eventually? Well, adjusted for inflation, how many of you will have greater purchasing power than your parents? Okay, you are exceptional. It used to be, if you were born in the 40s, pretty much no matter which, if you were born into a poor family, you're going to do almost 100%. You're for sure going to do better than your parents. Even if you're born into a relatively wealthy family, there's a really good chance you're going to do better than your parents in the 1940s. Everything was happening, the economy was exploding, and people succeeded in vast numbers, if you would. And if you were born in the 50s, still not bad, if you would. And then if you're born in the 60s, pretty good. But what's happening? Your chances of succeeding, of moving up in income profile from one generation to the next, the chances are going down and down. This is data taken from a long time ago, and no one has had the courage to update it. But here's another way to look at it. If you were born in the 1940s, on average, you had a 90% chance of earning more than your parents. And that likelihood is dropped to 60% when your parents were born. This is when your parents were born. They had a 60% chance statistically. This is the structure. And it went up for a moment there, but people born in the 80s, down to 50%. Now we're down like 40 or 30%. So the likelihood of doing better than your parents is going down. And what accounts for that? Well, the productivity of the workforce keeps going up. but the salaries, the income level is not keeping up with productivity. It used to be that as worker productivity increased through changes in technology, used to be that the wages and the income of the workers went up with it. But that changed around 1980. And more of that increased productivity, that increased wealth of the economy is captured by the wealthiest members of our society. And for 90% of the population, since around the 60s or 70s, it's flattened out. And that's, you see this different versions of this chart all over the place. What's up with that? So the stories that we tell and embedded in American culture is that with hard work, anyone can succeed. Who believes that? With hard work, anyone can succeed. Even Peter Parker. So there's a whole series of stories from the 19th century about with hard work, anybody can succeed. Little Jimmy steps off the boat. He's only got $1 in his pocket, but he becomes a corporate magnate in the end. Different locations have different social mobility profiles. If we lived in Canada, we'd have a greater chance of moving up in the income bracket from one generation to the next, as we do in the United States. Different places have different prospects for your life chances. These are all in aggregate. Different locations have different profiles of, and Boston, pretty good. We're looking at 46 to 49% chances of increasing from one generation to the next. Down in the South and in the territories of high Indigenous American populations, not so much. And this is a topic that we have one of the world's greatest experts on opportunity. He's in the house, and we're going to be hearing about this at some point. So let's look a little bit at income. Two things. Income is one thing. We've been talking about income. What is your income going to be? Previous generations had this weird thing. They would earn money and they wouldn't spend it all. Have you heard of this? It's not so true anymore. I'm sorry. But back in the old days, when people had income that was greater than what they were spending, they had this thing called savings. And the idea, the theory of this is that you accumulate savings and then you buy a house. You with me so far? I forgot to do my tech rehearsal.
The wealth between the richest Americans and everyone else is staggering. In the 1970s, the wealthiest 1% owned about 20% of the nation's total household wealth. Now, they own over 35%. Much of their gains over the last 40 years have come from a dramatic increase in the value of shares of stock. For example, if someone invested $1,000 in 1978 in a broad index of stocks, say the S&P 500, they would have $31,823 today, adjusted for inflation. Who's benefited from this surge? The richest 1%, who now own half the entire stock market. But the typical worker's wages have barely grown. Most Americans haven't earned nearly enough to save anything.
And so there's savings, and then there's another component of wealth. Yes, sir.
Your assets?
Yes. Well, your savings can take the form of different assets. You can buy bonds and bonds, which are very stable growth, and they used to be safe because they were backed by something that we used to call the US government. Then there's stocks, a little less volatile, but they in good times they can perform quite well. And then there's our topic, homes. Those are the assets. We put our savings into those assets. The other source of personal wealth is inheritance. And that wealth compounds not just over time because it's invested, but it compounds generationally as your great-great-great-grandparents inherited money from their parents and so on, and it accumulates. And so inherited wealth is a big factor of why wealth tends to concentrate in the hands of increasingly few number of households, as Professor Reich just explained. Are we good? And so what is this concentration of wealth? This graph is outdated. It's from 2013, so 12 years ago. The size of the US economy is represented by these dollar bills, has a roughly doubled. So there's about twice as much money stacked up. But this is a visualization of wealth concentration. There's 3 lines here. One is, they did a survey and they said, what do Americans feel should be the distribution of wealth? And it went something like this. If the whole US population is represented by 100 people, and the wealthiest person is here and the poorest people are over here, this is the wealth distribution that people thought would be good. This is the wealth distribution that they thought was true. But it turns out that even back in 2013, the reality was different than what anyone thought.
Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work hard to achieve that good old American dream, keep our country moving forward. So here's that ideal we asked everyone about, something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here's the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to profit chain.
And the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today. In 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds.
Okay, you get the idea. And that was 12 years ago. It's tripled again, more or less. So this is a chart that represents that. This is a more recent chart. This shows the rate of increase and the wealthiest, the crazy distribution of, if you look at the 100 people. Well, if you look at just the top 1%, it gets crazy. Then you look at the top 1/10 of 1%, and it's crazy. And it's even crazier when you get to the top 1/100th of 1%, which is 1/10,000th. What's 1/10,000th of 330 million Americans? It's a handful of families that are increasingly collecting and saving this money. It's moving rapidly to the top. Okay, you get the idea. So in that context, what chances do we have of purchasing real estate when, as we talked about in previous classes, the investor class are purchasing housing as investments and nobody's living in them? 1/4 of all home sales in the United States in the past few years has been to shell companies that are there to make investments on behalf of anonymous investors who do not want to be named. They don't want to be associated with this empty housing from the dark skylines above all of our cities, including Boston, if you look at One Dalton Place around dinner time. So this is a structural, these are structural conditions that are important to look at. And these structural conditions are to a large extent responsible for what we're about to experience. We're going to look at your journey to homeownership.
You talked a lot about wealth distribution, but how does that relate to urbanism or architectural design? What would if I were to write an analysis, my week 7 analysis on that, how would I approach that?
The short answer is to the extent that any solutions to this exist,
Okay.
we would want to see that. Land trusts, which to a large extent were born in the modern age, were born in Boston. So land trusts were established in this neighborhood that we're in the 70s and 80s during the urban crises. And this is one of the reasons I've been having trouble sleeping is like, oh my God, we're asking them to come up with positive examples now. Does that mean I have to come up with a positive example? I'm trying. I think there's one at the end of the lecture. And it hints at a few others. Okay, so strap in. So how much money are you going to make when you graduate? You don't know? Well, what's the average Wentworth graduate starting salary? 71,000, is that for architects?
That's overall.
That's overall. What do architects make? More than that or less? Less. How much less?
20.
Yeah. So when you graduate, you'll be looking at job offers if the economy is still viable. Of 50, 55, maybe $60,000 a year.
What's that? How are they?
Divide by 2,000. So $30 an hour for 60. And $25 an hour for $50,000. Which, by the way, if you remember slide 17, the average take-home pay is somewhere around $23 an hour. So you're already ahead of everyone else. So this is a theme. It's going to seem desperately difficult for you to buy a house, but you guys are in the privileged position of going to a college that touts its return on investment. And as difficult as it is, you're better off than most people. Okay? Return on investment. You pay for college and you get that money back because your degree is actually useful. No guarantees. It depends on how well you do in Studio 6. More than any other class. It's Studio 6 is what it boils down to. Your income earning potential in the profession of architecture boils down to these skills that you are developing in Studio 6. So pay attention to structures. Pay attention to passive and active systems. These are the things that distinguish Wentworth graduates from other schools. They didn't pay attention. You're going to take over. You're going to clean up. You're going to be promoted faster than the graduates of other schools. Okay. So your education is potentially worth something depending on what you get into it, what you put into it, and what you get out of it in terms of skills. So let's say 5 to 10 years out of Wentworth, you're ready to buy a house. So you went from 55,000, now you're making 65 maybe. How much are your student loans? Well, the average student loans for a Wentworth graduate is about $60,000. And so what are you going to be paying off those student loans every month? Does that sound high? Sounds low? I know, I don't get it. Do people not report their actual? What is this high or low? Who says this is low? Because I'm willing to adjust it. So what should we take it up to? Like 80? 80? Let's take it up to 80. Okay. I'm so sorry. Your parents suggested you do this degree in Europe, but no. So $800 a month is what your loan payments are going to be. These are the numbers. What do you make and what are you paying off in student loans? These are the numbers that go into the affordability calculator. Let's say you're making $70,000 a year when you're ready to buy a house. You're paying off your monthly debts are now $800. How much of a down payment can you afford? Down payment? Wait, what's this down payment thing? Well, your savings, you've been saving this time, right?
Or you inherit that.
Or did you inherit it? Did you inherit? Are your parents going to help you out with the house? Oh, I'm so sorry. Because whatever your house cost is, let's say you're buying a house for $200,000. The standard down payment is $40,000, 20% of that $200,000. First time home buyers, maybe 10%, so you could get away with $20,000.
If you can compete in the market.
Right, you have to be very attractive. As an income earner, physical attractiveness is optional. Okay, so see the house price we got here? Then we go to Zillow and look at the map and say, what can we afford? Are you guys okay? So, the name of this exercise is how far is your commute? Because we're planting the seed for next week's topic, which is automobile dependency. How far are you commuting? Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, how far are you commuting? So where can you afford a house? Because you want a backyard and you want a good school system. Who's going to have kids? Who's going to have kids? Wait, don't be ashamed. It's a good thing. Best thing I ever did. Okay. So this is hard. This is hard. I think I better get married. And so we can have two incomes. I'm not gonna be able to do this on my income alone. Get married now. And who are you gonna marry? Not just anyone. You should marry someone rich who's gonna inherit money, right? And these salaries, these are all male salaries. What if you're a woman? Women make 83 cents for every dollar a male makes. There's a 17-cent wage gap. No, you take that back, Damien. No, don't. Okay, okay. But what if you're not white? Oh, wait. What about architecture? Is architecture as bad? No, it's worse. Female architects make 80 cents for every dollar that a male makes. Okay, but wait, what about race? So you get the idea. This first scenario was kind of rosy. So let's so these, I had this all lined up, it's missing, but all this data is here. So let's say it's two of you now. Your annual income is not double the first one. It's unless you're smart and it's two men. If guys, marry a man. He's gonna be because we know it's a choice, right? In honor of Pride Month. Yeah. So marry a man.
And women, forget about women, please.
Yeah, just I don't even know what to say.
This is what you're saying.
So let's be heteronormative. Let's add these two salaries together. And let's add the monthly student loan payments. What should we put in for that? 2 student loans being paid off. I think it's going to be, let's say $1,500 a month. So she's got a little bit less debt. Okay, how are we doing? There's that down payment. Let's boost that down payment a little. See what we can afford. Okay, our monthly payments are here. 2,380. This is the machine for pre-qualifying for a mortgage. You cannot buy a house unless you qualify for a mortgage well, we're not talking about people who just lay down $500,000 for a house, right? We're not talking about it. We're talking about the rest of us who borrow money to buy a house. And so our monthly housing payments are now at $2,400. What can we afford if we do that? So we're paying $2,400, and didn't mean to save it. Apply let's do, it's an $80,000 down payment, just, we'll talk about that. So look at the houses that are now available. Look at this map. It's a long ways to get to the first dots. And if you look at some of these look okay. Before, there was a houseboat here. Did you see the houseboat? And there was a trailer.
I would drop it.
Right? So you're going to be driving from Worcester or Lawrence or Lowell. So while next time you go up to Lowell, check out the housing market. So, and then the other factor that is very important for this topic this week is schools. Schools factor in very significantly. So Zillow acknowledges that, and Zillow gives you a tool so that you can filter according to the quality of elementary schools for your lovely little darlings. Okay, you okay? Questions about this? Yes, Liam.
What if you factor in, rent while you're saving?
That's a whole nother exercise. It's similar, it's probably familiar to you because some of you are renting now to go to school. So you're in touch with how expensive rent is. And hopefully the rent you're paying now is something you can afford to pay when you graduate. If you're like the recent graduates in my family, they're currently, one of them is looking for an apartment in Somerville or Alston, and man, is it humbling. It is not easy for a young neuroscientist. Okay. Back to our regularly scheduled program. But it's context setting. It's really important to come to grips with how difficult the structural forces are stacked up against us. My daughter is going to heroically find an apartment, a beautiful apartment in Somerville for someone who just wants someone to take care of her cat and talk to now and then. And she's going to give her a really reduced rental rate. I'm confident something like that will happen because that's kind of her only shot. Okay. But that was the happy point. It now gets darker. Let's look at Los Angeles. So many of the things we've been looking at in this course come all together in the city of Los Angeles. Last week, we talked about how Southern California was being emulated all over the world in terms of these private gated enclaves. So let's look at the source of that just quickly. What are the characteristics of the Los Angeles model? So this is going to move quickly, and I've made a list of 5 characteristics of the Los Angeles model. And these are useful things to understand as we move forward. It could be called the Los Angeles model, but many people have taken it and they've said, let's promote this as a school of thought. So that's why we call it an LA school. And the LA school is characterized both by real estate corporations and associations who are promoting Los Angeles as a very convenient way to quickly expand real estate empires, the way we saw it in China and Indonesia and elsewhere. And then there are the critics, Mike Davis and Soja, among them, very important writers for architects and people who are thinking about cities in terms of social justice. So the LA school, 5 characteristics, here they are. Let's go through it. The first one that is clearest is that it's not like Chicago or Boston, where there was an urban center that expands out over history. LA was a series of towns. And they expanded and were swallowed into the single giant metropolitan network of freeways and commercial interests. So you can live in Pasadena and work in Santa Monica, and you're going to be spending a lot of time on the highway. It's a polynuclear city form, many different centers, which makes it different than the Chicago school. The reason they were eager to call it an LA school is because the Chicago School of Urbanism was so well established. Chicago school says, in the loop, everyone, this is the highest value. And that's why, because it's difficult to get in and out, that's why they had to build up. Very different from Dubai or the things we were looking at last week. The LA school is different. The LA school creates enclaves, and it's a multi-centered polynucleic system. We saw this chart when we were looking at Indonesia last week. And so there's the Chicago school concentric model, the sector model, which we're skipping over, and the polynuclear, the multiple centers model of the LA school. So this is the first characteristic. The second characteristic is that it tends to promote distinct competing images because it's an urban form produced by the forces of monopoly capitalism. And so every development company needs to promote its development by promoting a specific theme, which we saw in the examples last week. This is a Disney-themed, Disney-owned private community. This also gets at the question from first week about privatization that's been coming up the whole time. What is the deal with privatization of what we used to call towns? They used to be part of public things. Now these towns are actually corporations. They are not public municipal entities. They are homeowner communities, homeowner associations, and common interest communities that are businesses. And they have their own private fire departments and security forces. And the characteristic, the natural thing that comes about by this is because of capitalism, if I want to make money, my town needs to attract only the wealthiest people. So I make luxury housing for the wealthiest people, and I tell them, this is going to be deluxe, it's going to be private, it's going to be safe, and it's going to be racially homogenous. This is a marketing image. It's illegal to state it out loud, but there are other ways to achieve it. That's why the racial segregation of cities in the United States has gotten worse, not better, since the Fair Housing Act of 1968. This is Los Angeles during redlining, and this is Los Angeles more recently. It starts with zoning. A quick thing about zoning. Thank you.
American cities got this. You need to go back to the 1920s and 30s when the modernist planning establishment began tightening zoning regimes that neatly separated commercial, industrial, and residential building. The stated purpose of zoning laws was to prevent nuisances and pollution where people live, but also to guide developers to build and buyers to live in a single-family home, widely viewed by city planners as incubators of the ideal American family. To do this, city governments carved out wide swaths of city land and confined them to single-family homes, typically restricting residency to one family. And this presented some major problems.
So when you zone something for single-family homes as opposed to multi-family homes, it has the effect of making housing units more expensive.
That's economist Sandy Ikeda. But he says that one of the main effects of single-family zoning was to lower the availability of low-income housing.
I mean, very simply, it's more complicated than this, but if you have a lot which can accommodate one big house, let's say for 4,000 square feet, if you could divide that up into 4 smaller units of 1,000 square feet, the individual units could be sold or rented out at a lower price.
So this gets directly,
Cisco.
This gets directly to the question of land. How does land, and it's the land itself is not a commodity that can be reproduced. It's fixed. The supply of land is fixed. So if you put one family on an acre of land rather than 4 families, it's going to cost more. The housing is going to be more expensive. There's going to be a lower supply of housing. So the expansion of the single family suburbs has consumed the land in a way that reduces supply and increases the cost. Why is it so expensive? Why is it so difficult for you to afford the house of your dreams? This is a big source of it. So the 4th characteristic of the LA school is gated communities. And these are private corporations. And they mainly, we see them outside of cities, the gated communities with a guard protecting the community and a surrounding wall. It's a fortress model, and it doesn't just take up space, it also diverts traffic. So you actually have to go around these huge developments. And it happens inside of cities as well, where these luxury enclaves have these sky bridges to take people off the streets. That's why the city of Boston does not allow us to build bridges across streets from building to building. You have to really work hard to convince them to do that. They don't like it generally because it takes people off of the sidewalks. It reduces the life of the streets. And then there's security and surveillance. Oh, this is all part of security and surveillance. So the panopticon, remember the panopticon? Remember history? Panopticon citizen? In the version of this that I really appreciate is the architecture closes this off, so you can't tell if there's a guard in there or not. So you're on display in the cell. You're not sure if someone's watching you. There might be someone there with binoculars watching everything you do, or there might have been no one there for weeks. You don't know. You just better behave. And that's what security cameras do. Are there any security cameras in this room? No, but they're all over campus. And then 5th and final, automobile dependency. The tendency to expand these gated communities across the landscape, especially in Los Angeles, requires us to use automobiles to get around. Put a tag on that for next week. And Mike Davis, one of his last books before he left us was The Ecology of Fear, where he made the argument that unlike other locations, Southern California does not produce, the landscape is not the product of gradual evolution, of erosion, and slow forces. Southern California was produced by cataclysmic events, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, or wildfires. And that pattern continues. And in January, we had a devastating demonstration of that fact. Okay, how did LA happen? We're going to look at some of how LA happens next week when we talk about automobiles. But this is where we get into Richard Rothstein. Richard Rothstein's book in 2017, The Color of Law, that some of you read, is a direct response to the 1976 Washington versus Davis Supreme Court ruling that found that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and Constitution of the United States is not violated unless you can prove that the discrimination that results from the law is, you have to prove that it was intentional discrimination. And so before and since 1976, discrimination has been occurring. And when it's pointed out, to real estate agents, to municipal authorities, to corporations, to private interests, to private citizens. The response is, what? What? Me? What? That wasn't me. I didn't, that's not on purpose. That's a natural outcome. That's de facto. And so the term de facto is contrasted with de jure, by law. It's a legal structure. Is it a structural attribute of the operating system? Yes, in both cases, whether it's when you can't prove that it's intentional and when you can prove that it's intentional, both of those cases, it is structural. It is embedded in the operating system. For example, prior to the Fair Housing Act of 1968, this was the common exclusionary cause in all deeds, most deeds. At no time shall any such property or any buildings thereon be occupied or used by any person other than of the white race. Also, no pigs, no goats. This is the redlining of Boston. And this is the racial occupancy today. There's a direct correlation between the redlining maps of the 20s, 30s, and 40s up to 1968 and the current racial distribution of the city of Boston. Detroit, Michigan. Can you tell where the boundary between Detroit and Bloomfield is? Can you see it? New York City compared to Boston. Chicago compared to Boston. Los Angeles. This is, remember when we talked about the difference between income and wealth? And remember when we talked about wealth is your savings after you get your income and you pay your bills and what's left is your savings. Well, then there's the part of the inheritance. When your parents inherited wealth of their parents, where did that value come from? If you're white, it probably came from the valuation of their home, the increase in value of their home. We don't have time to talk about what's the difference between average and median, but that's a whole interesting conversation in and of itself.
Good.
So a key question of this course has to do with structure and agency. Let's think about the real estate agent who was fooled. When the real estate agent showed the house to a white family, but at the time of the sale, a black family showed up to purchase the home. That white real estate broker very well might have been a total racist. But what if he wasn't? Would he have behaved any differently? His ability to make a living, his ability to survive, depends on him not messing with the structure of the real estate market. His ability to send his kids to school, to stay in his house, to pay off his student loans, to survive in his decision space, depends on him going along with the structural forces of the system. So this is the thing. Every time you think that, oh, this is a bad person behaving badly, ask yourself the question, to what extent does it have nothing to do with whether the person is a bad person or a good person? To what extent is it not dependent on the morals and ethics of that actor? To what extent is it a structural reality that in order for that person to survive, they have to play along, they have to reinforce these rules, they have to act out these steps in the operating system? So if you want to change the outcomes in the world, you could go door to door. You could preach the gospel of the church. You could try to convince people to recycle, or you could change the operating system. And the argument that I'm floating here is that you will get much further in altering the structure that you have available to you to have an impact on. I have to mention white flight. This will come up next week. Development of the suburbs. Connecticut, who's from Fairfield County? Someone. Okay. That's courageous. We don't hear from him anymore. So earlier in the lecture, I was saying, what are the chances of you moving from your family's income level to a higher level? And some of you heard me saying, if your parents are born in the 40s, it was almost, it's 90% if you're white. You're born in the 50s, 80% if you're white, etc. The if you're white is kind of the way we used to teach history of cities was in aggregate like this. Here's the median unemployment rate of major metropolitan areas in aggregate, which doesn't tell the real story. Here's the unemployment rate in different cities of the United States, disaggregated. This is white unemployment statistics, and this is non-white, majority Black communities, etc. The ability to get a bachelor's degree in general, and then if you look at racial separation, income by race, home ownership of different cities in the United States divided by race, etc. So yes, individual performance may vary, but in aggregate, the structural forces are against you if you're a woman, they're against you if you're not white. And what can be done? If the challenge of the challenge of taking this course is to find positive examples that we can learn from, shouldn't your instructors try to live up to that challenge and offer you some suggestions? This is why I can't sleep. It's hard. But fortunately, Sam Maddox, who knows Sam? Sam Maddox. Before Sam Maddox came to Wentworth, at the end of the History Theory 2 course, I would always give a lecture about the rural studio at Auburn University in Alabama. And when Sam showed up, you will recall the last lecture of our history group. Remember that? Remember Sam giving the lecture? Well, these are slides from Sam's lecture. I'm going to present it in a slightly different way. So the rural studio, Samuel Mockbee, another Sam, the second Sam in the story, Samuel Mockbee in the 80s said, we have this architecture school, and wouldn't it be great if architecture students learned how to build? Wouldn't it be great if architecture students had actual experience building? And look, we have some of the most extremely impoverished communities in the country, just a few hundred miles from here, which in Alabama is really close. And so putting two to two together, he basically said, let's design and build homes for the least privileged of our neighbors in Hale County, Alabama. And so for many years, every year they build a fancy house, crazy, something provocative and shocking to put in their portfolios. And the recipients of this largesse tolerated it barely and said, okay, thank you very much, I guess. But it was kind of an unhealthy relationship. So near the end of Samuel Mockbey's life, he started to look at community projects that were less colonial in nature. And so they started, this is a chapel, they started to do public amenities. It's made from recycled, often these structures are built from free, recycled, industrial waste, agricultural waste, materials that were freely available in the environment. This is built from windshields, very beautiful, very photogenic. But after Samuel Mockbey's death, the inheritors of the studio said, okay, they went through a similar process that we're going through. Project, project, project. After 12 years, you have 12 buildings. It's great. You know, pat yourself on the back and feel good because at least you're doing more than they are up at Wentworth, right? What's Wentworth doing? Nothing. But is it enough? And they said, no, we have to scale it up. What is this? What is the operating system and how can we change people's prospects on a larger scale? So they noticed that most of these people were house poor, but land rich. Somehow, because of homesteading and the displacement of the indigenous peoples off the continent, and they inherited land that wasn't very valuable, but at least they had some land. So they figured out that the average piece of land can be mortgaged. This is not a mortgage so you can buy a house. This is taking the land and mortgaging it. You already own the land. I'm going to give the land to the bank, and the bank is going to give me $20,000, and I'm going to buy back that land from the bank over the course of 38 years. It's a standard loan arrangement. But if you have the land and you have public assistance, Social Security, the typical public assistance, Social Security check for the residents, that's the formula. They figured out the finances and they figured out that they could afford to buy $20,000 worth of house. So the rural studio set out the challenge was to how do you build a house for only $20,000? So they designed one and they built it. And then that model is available for hundreds or thousands of people to build. And they did it again and again and again, to the point where they were actually now, instead of doing one house a year, their designs were actually helping to produce thousands of houses. Not as sexy, but how sexy is it to actually shift the affordability formulation for tens of thousands of people? And because Sam taught at Wentworth, he said, let's do a studio that looks at this and explores this, and let's go down there. So there's Jared Germa, everyone's favorite co-op support person, and Wentworth students down in Alabama getting a taste of the rural studio. So this is an example of architectural design, not just doing the design of a project, but the design of an operating system. They're designing a project and an operating system together. Project design is integrated with the operating system design. Yes, ma'am.
We're the analysis that one of the core design moves is the operation system.
That's why we've introduced a feature of the analysis assignment that we like to call the footnote. The footnote is there to offer us information like the one I presented in the slide about the 38-year payback. So that the footnote is there not to quote anybody. The footnote is there to provide so that you can have information that will help us interpret the visual evidence. So if the visual evidence is this, There's the front porch, which was identified as the essential social component of the existing community. There's these materials, which are all chosen, this, you name the material, it was chosen because it was affordable and the labor to assemble it was freely available between me and my neighbors. The satellite dish is part of it, the car is part of it. And in order to interpret the simplicity of the house and to evaluate the true impact, in order for us to actually appreciate the power of what we're looking at, well, it's pretty simple, right? In order for us to interpret the visual evidence, it's useful to say that they created a financial arrangement where the land could be mortgaged and fund $20,000 worth of construction. Boom. It's information that comes from beyond visual evidence that helps us interpret what we're looking at. It's the interplay between the design characteristics and the larger operational system. Right at the beginning of the assignment, it makes it clear that what we're analyzing here are spatial or formal, spatial, institutional arrangements. The formal is the house. The spatial is that they have a car because they live way out and they can't get to a job unless they drive for 45 minutes. And the institutional arrangements, the finances that produce this architecture is this. So that's what we're analyzing. In order for us to not just design projects, but to design operating systems, we need access not just to the building form itself. Some of you are still highlighting building and dropping the surroundings. Thank you for highlighting the building and talking to us about the building. All architects go through this sequence. We're obsessed with buildings, and it's understandable because of Studio 6. But we're in the urbanism concentration. It's the relationship between the building and everything else. This image is not a good image for this assignment because yes, you have architectural scale human activity in the foreground, but we can't, you need to take the camera up a story so you can see over the top of the roofs and get a sense of the larger context of the landscape so that we can evaluate the spatial evidence of this. And then if anything about the operating system is useful to have us understand what's really going on here, we hope your paragraph includes that. If it's evidence from beyond the visual evidence, but no. And just to remind you, remember that lecture back in 2024, was it? Or 23? We also talked about the Aga Khan. If you want to look at things beyond the United States, the rest of the world, as we know, is facing suffering as well. The Aga Khan Award for Architecture that Burju talked about in that lecture is a treasure trove of operating system design. That's what the award is given for. Beautiful buildings that are also transforming the operating systems within which they operate. And other reminders, already in class, we've been hitting you over the head with examples from Barcelona and Medellin, Colombia. Also, similar in terms of how they touch on some of these issues. So that's it for me.
Yeah. So you will see, guys, that the topic of this week is highly connected with the topic of next week. I would say that is, in my opinion, Robert, you can agree in disagreement with me, but it's like the core of the class.
Yeah.
And it's basically telling about how cities shapes inequality and how inequality shapes cities. So one recommendation that I have for you is that you guys take this note, and I know that it's a little bit of extra work, but it will be very valuable if group 6, group of next week, also take a look at these notes. And try to see if there are some ideas that you can combine between questions for next week and questions for this week. And so next, and the other assignment that I have for everyone is that next week I will talk more about certain instruments that are basically looking the problem from the opposite side. This is the side of inclusionary. So everything that Robert was discussing was how these operating systems creates exclusionary zoning that excludes, and that excludes in two ways. One is through income and the lack of housing, and then that produces the house has to be very, very far away, and secondly, circulation and mobility. So, and this is the topic of next week. So how you have to move houses very, very far away in order to have cheaper homes. And there is a system because of the lack of affordability and the system of mobility that creates the city that we have today. What Robert described about PLA school. So we're gonna take the assignment for you. Listen to me. My only 30% of today is take a look at this presentation. They have certain videos, and we will discuss these presentations next week. So this presentation is basically about inclusionary options. It tries to be optimistic. So I wanted to spend 20 or 25 minutes probably next week to discuss certain alternatives that we have as an urban makers or urban policy makers to have more inclusion. But I want to take the 15 minutes that we have so far to discuss with you is, so you have to do an analysis for this week. And this, especially this week, the analysis is very challenging. And I can feel that because we were discussing about a lot of non-spatial factors that affects the environment. So we talk about a lot about how numbers work, how economics work, how social interaction work, how wealth move across the history. So I want to open a discussion here, and I guide you. I hope you can help me about what are the spatial evidence of this situation. If we can recognize what are the spatial evidence of everything that Robert discussed today, probably we can discover where are the analysis that we can do. But you follow me? If we can understand what are the spatial evidence, how this has an evidence in the space, we can have some better ideas about what are the analysis, the type of examples that we want to crop to do our analysis. Are you following me? The discussion we're going to have? What are the spatial evidence here? But before that, Robert, I have a question for you.
Please.
The analysis has to be positive or could be negative?
We asked, well, we just set up the structure. We ask that you give us instructive examples that we can learn from in terms of, so we can draw a diagram of what to do. So we can take that diagram and the principle with us in practice and not come up empty-handed when everybody in the room turns to us and says, what do we do?
Yeah, I agree, but I'm with you, but you think it's a possibility? Probably the answer is no. I want to understand. And I'm putting now in the size of the student. If we find a case that is not working, can we learn from what is not working? It's much more difficult.
It's much more difficult because we're still going to ask you, what then must we do? It would be great if you look at race segregation in the cities of the United States. You say, here's what we do. We just do this. Here's the diagram. All we have to do is do this and it's solved. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. But we don't have a right to ask. That's hard.
Yeah, so in conclusion, we have to find alternatives that in some way they are working.
It has some hope. There's a promise.
Okay. So let's open the discussion again. After this clarification, I will start with you. So what are the spatial evidence? How everything that Robert discussed is shown in the space? Yeah.
It wasn't even that. It was just for telling us to get. You were just mentioning the assignment with the choosing an area within a larger context. I feel like we're already doing that. Are you trying to just confuse?
No, we still want
Decided
you,
from the start.
yeah, we still want you to have human scale activity that we can, is legible to us in the foreground. Set in the context of a larger
Yeah.
context.
So what he's trying to say is that,
Same as it.
yeah, if
I
you
guess
have.
what you were reiterating it, and I thought you were trying to change it, even though.
No, it's a reiteration, it's a reiteration.
That's all.
So basically, we're trying, and this is something that I want to say that again. So if your perspective is too closer to the ground, you won't see, you see the human scale,
It's hard
but
to
you don't
see
see
the
the
system.
interaction with the space and the whole environment.
Where's the
If-
system?
Yeah, what is the system? And if your view is too far away, like an aerial view, you can see the system, but you cannot see the human experience.
Right,
So, because we want to connect the system and the human experience, we want you to have an aerial view that can see, that can show both. And that's, I have to say, Robert, that's the most difficult part of the design.
but that's the
Selecting the
profession.
right image is the most difficult part.
That's the profession. Radical change happens when people walk into and experience something that they didn't experience before. What is that experience that we give them where operating systems shift?
Yeah, so answering is not a changing of design, it's exactly reinforcing what we are expecting for you. I gotta turn on the light, please, okay? Because I want to have the discussion with everyone. So again, I need to understand, because I'm confused.
Me too.
What are the spatial evidence of this exclusionary zoning that Robert described? How is that can see that in this space? Please. How we see, or if we don't have that. Can you summarize Robert's like?
Ooh,
Let's do that in one sentence. I gotta do that very time. What we are discussing today.
Never buying a house.
You're never buying a house.
The American Trees for Wildlife Projects.
American Tree for Working Products, he said.
How our current urban model sort of perpetuates, what is it, inequality?
Yeah, and what inequality means in the space, that's a good one. You listen to him? So how the urban system perpetuates urban inequality, how it looks like. How inequality looks like in the city. Yeah,
I mean, you can see it in like you can walk outside and you look at like the projects or whatever in Mission Hill and they're more run down and stuff, so you can like see the.
yeah.
The actual.
You look at, I like the idea of having this type of example. We see that in the projects. So because the only way that's the underprivileged community can live inside the city instead of buying a house very far away is through public investment. And sometimes it has lost or less resources.
but Hope 6, public housing has gone through transformation.
Yeah, but it's a hope. There is a hope
No,
there.
Hope 6 is the
Yeah.
name of the program.
Yeah.
Hope VI is the program that has improved the quality of public housing all over, some more so than others.
So probably finding an examples of public housing that is inside the city, but also it's not the typical, but have certain good architecture could be an option. Right. Any other option, how we see in urban inequality, how we see that in the city, in the current space that we have now. I want to see spatial evidence of this inequality. What else? Kevin?
Maybe we can look at like infrastructure, roads, where they're going, how they're cutting through different communities and neighborhoods.
Okay, do you have an example of that?
Like, I don't know, like a highway going to Black Diamond or something.
Yeah,
Hurts the little we went there.
yeah, yeah. So, and also I can contribute, this is my contribution. You can see that if you compare sometimes the amount of investment that you see in a community that is very far away of the city versus the opportunities and the investment that we see in other more wealthy areas that are very well connected. So if we understand these differences between the spaces that are less investment, because they are very far away or they're in a red line district or for several reasons of this complex system of inequality versus one that is more rural. Can you imagine a project, an idea, an example that can remediate this? Can you imagine how you address that, Damien? You're really far, I can see. So you have an area that have less investment because it wasn't red like this. And you are an architect, almost a senior. How you can address this situation? So this is an architect. DM has this goal for the body. Can you?
I don't wanna steal it from them though. You wanna,
Can you?
I would say that the first step is addressing what is missing in the community. Don't look at it just from the architectural classic standpoint. Oh, look at these buildings, or matter how people understanding what that space is lacking and what they need.
Yeah, Liam, I got to talk about that, Liam. Yeah,
That was good.
that was very good. It was very good. Yeah, yeah, Liam.
the visual distance or difference is probably, like, I was thinking maybe add better institutions like either health or education within those communities.
Okay, like providing amenities, we can, what else we can do, guys? Yeah,
Investment is the issue. You can increase the amount of taxes you're getting by increasing density.
oh, densification, okay. That makes sense. So having more dense community and how do you increase or diversity within that densification? Because you can get taxes. Yeah, what else? Come on.
Back to one of the questions was how do aesthetic, cultural context reshape Black culture spaces? Is our build being like Black culture spaces? I think that when we should come down to a census, like we should do a community census of like the types of people living in an area and see like the majority or what type of aesthetic like pleasing materials that we can bring into. It doesn't have to be like a full-on house. It could be a park or something like a type of community or like race are really like into that space where it doesn't have that race and it would like people to come there or just because of that.
Yeah, and how that is, how we can have an evidence in the public space through that policies. He's talking about certain infrastructure, like public spaces that are spaces for gatherers to everyone, and then we can reflect diversity in those. So what else? What else we can do in this community? Public, yeah. So I don't remember your name. Sorry? You know what? She was my lecturer in Studio 4. Yeah. She presents in my class.
I'm not,
Do you remember that?
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. That was.
She, in freshman year, the award-winning charcoal drawing. Freshman year.
Yeah. So what else we can do, please?
Freedom.
Freedom. Of how I remember that we're talking, and the reason because we're doing this exercise is because we want you as an architect to take these actions to the space. So what are the spatial evidence of freedom? How we see freedom in the space? I'm going with you after she responds.
Yeah.
Say there is public housing. They should be given space and policy should allow them to build that space on their own as they need.
Okay, it's basically having a housing project that reflects the diverse needs of different communities. How is it in the space, Liam?
By providing access. If you don't have access to something, you're not free to do it or to use it.
Okay, that's a good one. So we diversify the units and we increase access from these units to certain resources in order to provide people freedoms to use them or not. And you're right. If you have the space there, but you don't have access to that, since it doesn't exist. What else? One more. What else? How else we can do to improve the issue of disinvestment because of this operating system? I'm being very pragmatic today, but I think that would help you to find examples of analysis. One more? If there is no, I can move forward. Okay, right.
Public transportation.
Improving public transportation. So everything that you are doing, that you're saying, I hope that you took notes, because I didn't. Everything that we say here about how we can transform this investment into more diversity, freedom, access, equity, and investment into different communities are things that you can look around in the world, including the United States. Remember that the United States is bigger than the world is bigger than the United States. In the world, as an example to do your analysis. So what I'm trying to do is, I decided today to take these minutes to do this exercise where we can transform this learning into the way this learning reflects into the public space, into the spatial evidence. Because I know that one of the most challenging parts of the analysis is selecting a case study. I have in 2 minutes, and I will explain, if you're okay with me, I will do a hint about how opportunities reflect in the space. And you can explain that because I think that can help you. And this is a concept that I call, can I talk about spatial opportunity for a second? Okay, this is called spatial opportunities, okay? Spatial opportunities is basically the opportunities that people have to access to the resources that the environment has. I'm gonna say that again. Spatial opportunities are the opportunities that, I think that because I think that can help you to find cases for your analysis, What are the opportunities that people have to access to the resources that the environment has? That is a special opportunity. So if we analyze the environment and access to these opportunities, where do you think are the factors that are there? So what is the spatial factors that affects access to this space? One is location. So let's imagine that I am here, Tyler. I am here, and I am closer to Tyler. Tyler is the community. I am the resource, the healthcare center. So if I am here, does he have more opportunities to reach out to me or not? Yes. If I am here, no. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. But imagine that I am here. So who has more opportunities to reach out to me? Here, Tyler and Tyler Mackenzie has more opportunities. Tyler Mackenzie. Tyler. So he has more opportunities to reach out to me. But it's not only I do that. So who has more opportunity? Who's closer? Tyler. But who has more opportunity? Mackenzie. Why? What is it? Because it's a bridge. Because of connection. So there are two factors that affect spatial opportunities: proximity and connection. So and this relation between proximity and connections creates spatial opportunities. Are you following me? So which means that we can do a graphic here following his. So we can do a graphic where we have proximity and connection, and we have little proximity and little connection. You have little opportunities. You have something that is really close but not connected. You have somehow you have really connected and not close somehow, and you are connected and close. You have a lot of opportunities. You follow me? So this relation about this dynamic relation between proximity and connections creates spatial opportunities. If you understand examples where things are connected and closer, you can find spaces for all in order to create more investment in underprivileged communities. Is that okay? Okay, go for it.
Well, what about these guys?
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. So you have 3 minutes. I'm sorry.
You have -1 minute.
Negative 1 minute, yeah.
Maybe do it in the document?
Yeah, I wrote down some of the questions.
They will do in the documents and
In the.
Tondo will present that for us Tuesday, and you will present that for them for. Yeah, sorry.
No, no.
Yeah.